systems.
Whatever you want.
Yeah.
And what does that do,
Well, you could have lymphedema
I bought it
where
there before.
you get a lot of swelling
swelling.
oh,
Fluid retention.
fluid retention,
That's fine.
okay.
Oh, I
Doesn't matter
have
to
to
me, I
recognize
just-
that word's a fluid
Today
retention.
might be a good day to get
No,
this
no,
done.
we had terrible trouble with that.
Yeah,
You
that's
did,
not
or
right.
you
Oh, no,
said
no,
you
no.
So
had
it's not
some-
gonna rain,
Yeah.
right, this weekend? I mean, excuse me, the next couple of days.
But he went to a week's education and got
Because that's the
certified,
main thing, I
so
just have to do it when it's not.
and then people to him that have those kinds of issues.
I can't even remember when I did not have one
Monday
I had knee
says some
replacement,
rain.
and that's why I think I went to
Thunder
those
is
for quite a
possible,
while.
it's only 30%, so.
It's amazing. I was pretty young when I had that.
And then I could
The moral of the story is when you have those kind of needs,
see if my next one.
don't put it off. Because I don't even remember, I mean, you wouldn't even know by looking at it and my function, it's like,
Okie doke, we need to get moving. Just check, we are live, it appears, online, so we'll start with the prayer and we'll get going. Dear Jesus, be with us again this day, we pray. As we look at your word, especially help us open our eyes and hearts to it and how it might affect us even today. We ask this in your most precious name. Amen. So we're going to do our review of chapter 14, 53 to 72. I wanted this to be quick, but there's a lot of pages there, and as I kept marking things, I don't know how long it will be, so we'll look at it. I think the most important thing to remember is number 2. I'm looking at number 2. There are 2 events. They're happening at the same time. They are not one after another at the same time. It's all going on together. I think another important point is number 6. Even though Peter is following from afar, he's still following Jesus. He's not like Judas, as we'll learn. I mean, that's in another gospel, right? The one interesting point that I found fascinating is number 7. When it says he's warming himself by the fire, he's actually facing the light, it is literally. And so commentators go off on this, talking about, literal, you can see one way. If he's facing the light, then the servant girl can see who he is because he can see his face. But the other thing is they emphasize, maybe there's a metaphorical thing there too. He's still facing the light. Jesus is the light of the world, as opposed to Judas, who does all of his things in darkness. Interesting. Maybe putting too much there. I think sometimes we like to do stuff like that, but it's fun to think about anyway like that. So that's numbers 7 and 8. I don't need that one. Number 11. A lot of witnesses are called and they can't agree, so all of their testimony is invalid. They have to be total in agreement. Number 13 talks about some of the different possibilities. Jesus at different times talked about tearing down the temple, right, destroying, rebuilding it. And so they could have been talking about different events as well. Or I don't know, if we all saw something happen, we would possibly use different words to explain it, and who knows how different it would turn out to be. Number 16, I found fascinating. Jesus was required by law to answer the accusations brought against him. It's not like here where you can take the 5th in our country, right, and not have to self-incriminate. There you were required by law, so Jesus, interestingly, was breaking the law in that sense. I find fascinating. Number 18, the word siopao is interesting, and the tense of it is Jesus didn't become or fall silent, but he remained silent. And the emphasis is he's silent through the whole part here, until we get to, I guess, a little bit later on, right? Number 20. It is not immediately apparent until one studies it, but in the interchange in chapter 12, Jesus hands his opponents the weapons on occasion for his own demise. Why does he do this? Because his opponents are hard-pressed to have anything substantial to lay against him. In other words, if Jesus didn't give him this, they couldn't have found him guilty. He had to be guilty, right? Or he had to be found guilty, I should rephrase that, so that our salvation could occur through his suffering and death. Number 22 points out that in verse 62, we have three major titles of Jesus brought together: Christ, Son of God, and Son of Man, which was Jesus' favorite one. Number 23, I've done more thinking on this based on the way it is written when Jesus says, I am, I don't think. I'm not sure it's like I am he that he said elsewhere. I think it's just an answer to the question. You can obviously have a different response. I don't know. That's where I'm finally coming down. Number 27, partway through, the session of the court thus ended with the formal decision to hand Jesus over to the Roman procurator and with carefully formulated charge that would secure the execution demanded by the court. And then down to 31. At the precise time, again, emphasis, same time Peter is doing all of this, Jesus is being interrogated by the court. Again, 34 emphasizes he's facing the light. 35, he goes out from the courtyard, out toward the entryway. My reading is he's getting closer to getting out of there. He's feeling the heat, maybe more than literally, but figuratively. And it's interesting, number 36. I'm not sure what Bible you use, but if you check it out, some will have the rooster crows the first time, but the best, the oldest texts do not have that. And so the whole Lexio Difficiliquitior, I can't speak that very well, sorry, kind of says, they said, oh, we have to have, someone left it out, so they possibly put it in. I don't know if that's true or not, but the best, oldest manuscripts do not have that. 37, I think, is important. I'd like to read the whole thing for you. Peter's denial in this verse, as well as in 14:70 to 71, should be noted in light of 8:34 to 38. Remember, that's when he says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. There Jesus said that if anyone desired to follow after him, that person ought to deny himself, take up his cross, and follow him. Whoever desired to save his life would lose it, and whoever would lose his life on account of me and the gospel would save it. And finally, that whoever is ashamed with respect to me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in his glory of his Father with the holy angels. Peter's actions certainly revealed desire to save his life, and thus his being ashamed of the Son of Man. No wonder he breaks down. I'm sorry, it's right before this that he says, you are the Christ, the Son of God. And this is the response. Remember, Peter said, even if everybody else, right? I won't. Well, he did too. But there is hope. 38 emphasizes it. Again, he's facing the light. He will be restored. Judas was not, he is not restored. It's 42. This is from verse 71. The statement that he began to invoke a curse is left intentionally without any object in the Greek text to denote both that he cursed himself if he is lying, and those present if they insist on asserting that he was a disciple. And I find it interesting that point number 43, that he doesn't say the name of Jesus, the title of Jesus, in that verse 71, which reads, then he started to curse and swear, I don't know this man you're talking about. And I find it interesting, if you look at number 49, this is by a fellow by the name of Gundry. Notice how it gets, what the denials grow in intensity, if you will. First time, he doesn't understand what she's talking about. The second time, he denied that. And the third time, he curses. So each one ratchets it up a little bit as he goes on. And then there's the quote in number 44, sorry to back up, from Lang that I read to you last week about when the rooster crows. I guess they must be special Jerusalem roosters to crow like that type thing. I don't know. We don't have them in this country doing that. But apparently it's not just this guy that says it. Others have done it as well. This man. Remember, with all of the stuff about Peter, he will be restored. And I think it's my opinion, it's only my opinion, well, maybe it's other people's opinion too, but I think the reason Peter have all of this in him, where he does not come out looking very well, does he, is to emphasize how then we then can be restored when we mess up. And I think that's very powerful. That's a quick run through. You have comments, questions? Mr. Tim has one.
Yeah, I think
Refer to number if you would.
7. Going back to 7, that
7.
Thank
I
you.
never thought about, read the words.
Facing the light?
But that could be the light of Jesus. And certainly we're talking about a dark night. I mean, there were no street lights, so.
Verse 54 reads this way. Peter followed him at a distance right into the high priest's courtyard. He was sitting with the servants, warming himself by the fire. And so I'm always interested in why it says by the fire when literally it's talking about light, by the light, by the firelight. So I guess firelight would be better in my estimation, but I'm not an expert Greek scholar. I don't know why they transfer. I don't know. But yeah, I think that's important. And it's interesting that then in the light she can see him. And that also says that she somehow knows who he is. It's in John's gospel that she's called the portress, kind of like a porter, the female version. And that, so there's an indication that maybe, and this is a big maybe, that she was actually there at Gethsemane and saw him there. It's possible, but it does not say that. It does not specifically say that, but it's possible somehow she knows he's with them. And I think it's because it's not until later that we get into the language part, but she recognizes him, sees him. I mean, this is the guy that took the sword and went like this. It's not like this, but it was like this. And according to, I forget which gospel, it was the little ear that he cut off, which is the ear lobe type thing. And so if you're doing that, you're not going down like this. He's trying to take off his head. So it was a short one, but it was fine. So somehow she knew who this guy was. Now, I don't know, there are various reasons. So, but she saw him, and then she sees him again, and then on the third time, the other folks there are saying that the hangers-on, the bystanders, saying, "Hey, well, you got to be one of them. You're Galilean." Either by the way he's dressed, I think it's Matthew that says the way they talk, they couldn't say. Some of the gutturals in the way that folks down, they're just country folks. It's like if you go down south, people talk different there than they do up north. Or if you go up north and you talk, some of those people talk strange. All of you folks talk strange. I originally grew up in Oregon. There is no accent there. That's what everybody says, right? If you grow up in Texas, you don't have an accent. Everybody else does. It's just where you grew up. Sorry, that's more than you wanted probably. But yeah, I think the light part is very interesting. And I would prefer, I guess if I were writing a translation, I would say warming himself by the firelight, because I think that emphasizes the light aspect, and yet it's produced by fire. Anybody else? Any of those? You want to go on to the new stuff? Because we're doing a, there it is, I'm sorry. We're coming before Pilate, and then I threw in also the next 4 verses right after that to talk about how Jesus is treated before we actually get him going out to be crucified. Are you ready to go on? Okey-doke. We're in chapter 15. Taking us a while to get here, but we're getting near there, right? So here Jesus is officially handed over to Pilate, right? Jewish leaders, who are the local policing authority, if you will, no longer have any authority. And so, interesting, there's always this question, who is responsible for Jesus' death? People in the past blame Jewish people for that. They're the ones who said crucify him, but legally, the responsibility falls on the Romans, on Pontius Pilate. For a while, when I was a pastor in Bethesda, we had a secretary who was Jewish. It was interesting because she was a part of the Jewish faith continuum that would be the Reconstructionists, which is very left-leaning, if I can put it that way. You understand what I mean? They're the ones, if I remember correctly, that came up with bat mitzvah instead of bar mitzvah for the females. And so this lady, she was always sad because she grew up in a conservative one and she never had a bat mitzvah. I don't know why she didn't have it, but apparently, anyway, that goes too much. But it was coming up near Holy Week, and so she was proofing the bulletins and all that stuff. And I came in this one particular day, and she said, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Oh, you can always ask me anything." "Well, I'm nervous to ask you this." Okay. I thought, what's going on? Were we losing her or something like that? She got a better job offer, more money or something. And she said, "Why do Christians blame Jews for Jesus' death?" Because she read the part in there, his blood be on us and our children. What would you say? Interesting, right? Think of the moment. I'm thinking about it in light of the message this morning about circle out, keep an open eyes, keep an open heart. And I go, oh, I could talk about why Jesus died to this lady who is of Jewish faith. And that's what I did. I said, well, actually, the person who's responsible for his death is me. And she gives this kind of like, what? Apparently had never heard this. Jesus had to die because of the sins of everyone. He died because of me. I said, there happened to be Jewish religious leaders who were involved. Happened to be the time he was born. Now, having gone through this and looked at it closer, I would say, well, actually, the person who is legally responsible is Pontius Pilate, who had the opportunity to let Jesus go because he found no guilt in him, right? But he did the expedient thing, so there weren't, it's kind of like almost that you see things happening around us now where we're going to let some folks go so there's not more trouble in the world or something like that. And that's kind of what he did. He said, well, I'm not going to let him go. We're going to crucify him because it would be less trouble. And then there's this backstory that Pilate had got in trouble, couldn't get any more trouble with the Romans above him, else he might lose his position. He didn't want to do that. So the responsibility is not upon the Jewish people. If you think about it, it's upon every single one of us. And interestingly, his blood be on us and our children is a true statement, though, isn't it? But it's on all of us and all of our children. Mark?
Didn't you also use the approach that it was God who sacrificed his son and it was his plan? So ultimately, it was God putting Jesus to death. How that all worked out practically is kind of irrelevant, right? So God ultimately put him to death.
Well, Jesus is the one who basically brought about his own demise, as the one point from last week. Jesus gave them the legal responsibility. All I'm talking about is legally, it's Pontius Pilate who is responsible. Morally, I think it's every single one of us. It was God's plan, right? From before our creation, God knew it was going to have to happen. Right. But I think it's important that we don't say Jewish people are responsible, because there have been times in history when they were basically persecuted because they killed Jesus. And that's a foolish thing, very foolish thing. Again, it was very fascinating to see this lady's response, she was speechless, and she was not a speechless person generally, with that response, and maybe it gave her something to think about. I don't know. Okay, that was more than I wanted to say there, but we should move on because we got a lot to go through in this. As soon as it was morning, having held a meeting with the elders, scribes, and the whole Sanhedrin. Now it's interesting, it comes out more in, I think it's Matthew, that there was a meeting apparently in the daytime. At night is not legal, from my understanding, for the Sanhedrin to make a decision, so they had to have a daytime meeting, and that may be what that refers to. Or it refers to the fact that they had this thing, they've come up and they're going to hand him over to Pilate. The chief priest tied Jesus up. Notice it's the chief priest who seemed to be the leaders in this group of chief priests, elders, and scribes. They tied Jesus up, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. Here you are. And so the legal responsibility comes to Pilate to carry out what was supposed to happen. And where is it? It's right there. So the reason they wanted Jesus, why did they want Jesus dead? Why did the religious leaders want Jesus dead? What would be your understanding?
They were messing with them. They didn't like what he was doing to their life, and it was affecting them negatively.
Okay, there's the whole thing about we're afraid that the Romans are going to then come, which they do later on anyway, right? They don't like how Jesus is popular with the people. I think you have to throw in, they don't like the whole thing about he's He does not follow the laws as they have interpreted them through the oral tradition. And I think the big one, the one that comes up as we looked at last week, it was the tearing of the robe. Why did the high priest tear his robes? Because Jesus claimed to be Messiah, right? So there's all of that. But none of that is going to be given to the Romans. What will be given to the Romans? What is the reason that Jesus will die?
Inciting a riot?
It's going to be dealing with that area, right? It's completely different. So, I mean, that would not be a capital offense. Interestingly, the one that they tried to get him on first that we talked about last time, the whole thing about tearing down the temple, I did not know this before I did this study, that in the ancient world and among the Romans, the threat of tearing down a religious structure is death penalty. If you did it, you were dead. If you threatened to do it, you could be dead as well.
Then the Jews tell Romans, like, to our people, him claiming to be the Messiah is death penalty. They were trying to convince the Romans that to us, right?
Okay. So there is an element of the whole thing of, but that comes in, he's claiming to be king.
Right.
So it goes to that as opposed to Messiah religious type
And the
thing.
Romans, they respond by basically saying, well, we can't, to us, that's not a,
That's not an issue for them, right? That's a religious thing you guys to deal with, but you couldn't crucify him for that. So blasphemy was not one of those which Roman law had for that type of punishment. That was not part of what they could do, interestingly enough, I found. Instead, Pilate asked a question. So where does this question come from? That's the interesting thing. It just kind of sticks out there, right? So Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He answered him, that's Jesus answered Pilate, "You say so." So there's this thing called an eulogium, E-L-O-G-I-U-M. And so I looked it up in my dictionary because I read about it, and my eulogium said it's a plural for elegy. And I'm going, no, that's not what it is. So I had to open up my religious stuff, and this is what I cut from an eulogium. This is the conclusion of the results and findings of a preliminary investigation. So what this means is that the preliminary investigation that was done by the Sanhedrin, there's a document of some sort called an eulogium that's passed on. That's kind of what happens in trials now, right? There's something that's given. These are the charges. This is what we found thus far. And so Pilate would have read that. And from that, he goes, oh, so what they're saying is you're saying you're a king of the Jews, and that's why they want me to find you guilty. So what does Jesus say? You say so. It's interesting, the way the words are in Greek is could be, that's what I put there in number 2 on the side. You say so, or could be, do you say so? It could be a question, because there are not those types of things in Greek at that time. And the chief priest accused him. They brought charges against him of many things. And I think that's where we're going to list all of the things that we were talking about before. But the one that they're going to have to do is going to really have to come to him is this whole thing about claiming to be the Christ. That is the one, claiming to be the king. That is the one that Pilate is referring to there. In verse 4, Pilate questioned him again. Aren't you going to answer? Look how many things they are accusing you of. But Jesus did not answer, so Pilate was amazed. Jesus is not speaking again. These are words kind of from Isaiah 52, 53, the whole suffering servant thing, where Jesus is going to remain silent. He speaks not, talks about in that section. It's quite interesting as well. Pilate is amazed. That's an interesting word to me. To be astonished, he's marveled that this man before him is not responding to everything that's said about him. If you watch some of these trial things on TV, with the cameras, they have all of it. Have you ever watched some of those? And it's interesting to watch the person who some of the people who are being tried, some of them actually talk and when they're not supposed to and yell and things. Others get angry looking, and some of them just sit there stone-faced. And that's what it appears to me Jesus is doing. He's he'd be standing stone-faced in front of them. And it astounds Pilate because he'd not seen this type of response, because usually there would be some type of response by now. So we come then to what to me is some of the more difficult points to talk about. I'm going to read 6, 7, and 8. At the festival, Pilate used to release for the people a prisoner whom they requested. Interesting, used to release, it talks about that this is a normal thing. It's never mentioned outside of the New Testament, interestingly. It's not listed in any historical documents. Doesn't mean it didn't happen, but it's just interesting. Could have just been a local custom that he did. There was one named Barabbas who was in prison with rebels who had committed murder during the rebellion. And Barabbas, if you look over on number 7, you see that the name literally means the son of the Father. It's going to be some irony there if you think about. So who are they going to ask for? The literal son of the Father, Jesus, or this person who is called, perhaps even calls himself, the Son of the Father? That's an interesting point. The crowd came up and began to ask Pilate to do for them as was his custom. So here's the big question. Who is the crowd? Where did the crowd come from? Where did they fall in all of this? You ever thought about that? I think whomever the crowd is very important to understand. Are they, well, let's start with that. Let's see, I need my little piece of paper. Are they the folks who came with Jesus? Came in with Jesus for the triumphal entry? Are they folks who the religious leaders brought in with them? Because, this is a big thing, this temple thing. I always thought it would be the religious leaders bringing folks in that they could control. Because they want Jesus gone, they're going to bring those folks in. That's what I always thought. But Volz makes an interesting point. The 3 scenarios of the crowds, and Pilate gave you that thing there. He has 3 different scenarios. And I don't want to read through it all in great detail, but it's interesting to look at the differences. If you look at scenario number 1, and I printed them each on a separate page so that if you'd like to tear stuff apart, you can compare them to one another. But scenario number 1, letter A, the crowd is mixed in its attitudes, with some supporting Barabbas, some Jesus, and some being just Jewish rabble. I like that word, rabble. Just, hey, there's something going on, let's find out, right? There's a crowd, let's go there. I think you could throw in people who were brought by the religious leaders too, but that's just me. And so that's one possibility, right? And so then you can follow down. Pilate reckons it to be so. He figures that. He tries to release Jesus, but he's not fooled by the religious leaders. That's D. E says the chief priests are worried the people might ask for Jesus, therefore the chief priest incite the crowd to request Barabbas. That's what seems to me to be happening, Come on, say Barabbas, say Barabbas. That's why I always thought it would be folks like that. Pilate is surprised, letter F. The crowd turns on Jesus, and Pilate's confused. He says Jesus is innocent. Nothing changes, so he just gives in anyway to release Barabbas. And he will send Jesus to a gruesome death. The strength of this scenario is this understanding of chapter 15, verse 11, with the chief priest stirring up the people. Okay. Number 2. This is one I never thought of. Scenario number 2. The crowd is positive toward Barabbas and has turned its back on Jesus already. So these are people. This assumes the crowd knows Pilate always. Tim, did you not get this one? This is a separate one. Do you have this one?
Yes, I do.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were looking. I apologize. So this is a separate entire. This is in this one, the people who were knowing Barabbas, they wanted to get him free. They knew that every year Pilate would release somebody, so if we get our people there, we can get our guy. That's what this one seems to indicate. And you can see that Pilate is surprised if you look down at letter F, not number F, apologize for that, that Pilate's surprised. And G, the crowd rejects Jesus. Pilate's confused. He indicates Jesus innocent. And H, and then same thing happens. He goes ahead to give him. And Scenario 3 is the one Volz suggests. And these are all possibilities. It's up to you to decide what you want. Letter A. The crowd is positive towards Barabbas and has turned its back on Jesus already. Okay? So if that's true, Pilate knows this and he acts accordingly. He suggests releasing Jesus to tweak the Jewish leaders. This would destroy their plans. He's in control. This kind of sounds like Pilate to me, the stuff I know from elsewhere. He's not fooled by the religious leaders. Letter D. The chief priests must make sure the crowd does not change its mind and must urge it in the right direction. Letter F. Pilate is still tweaking the leaders. They might be afraid that he would release both men. That would be interesting, right? Oh, they don't want that. So the crowd will reject Jesus openly. Verse 13, Pilate is amazed again. And then letter I. Pilate reaches a rational conclusion to conform to the conventional agreement regarding prisoner release and release Barabbas. Then he gives the crowd what it wants regarding Jesus to avoid a riot and further trouble. This ends another day's in the prefect's office, as it were, and so he has his afternoon off, as apparently a man like him would like. Get the work out of the way early, washes his hands. That's in another gospel. It's interesting that's not in this one. Washes the hands of the whole thing. So Volz, as it says, the last paragraph says, he likes the third one. I don't know. I think that it's interesting because we are introduced to Barabbas very early in this, if you think about it. That's in verse 7. So Barabbas is mentioned, then the crowd comes up and begins to ask for him to do. That's the emphasis Volz makes on it. That this was early to introduce them, so it must be something with them. I don't know. I think it's still my opinion that the religious leaders throw in a bunch of ringers to try to pull it out. That's my thing. So I guess I'm putting scenario 4 on the table. I wonder if that's there. That they make sure they know it's happening. I mean, how are you going to know that there's a thing before the governor? Because there was no internet there, right? No text messages going out. None of that's happening. Newspapers, no. Somebody's going to have to let the info out. And if you know that he's getting these folks, if you know that Jesus is being sent there, then I think you'd get your people there. The other possibility, it seems to me, is the Barabbas thing, that Barabbas followers knew that somehow they got news. Maybe that was through the chief priests pulling them in too, that knowing that they would want Barabbas and not Jesus. I don't know. So it's interesting. All of this is to say it's important to try to figure out who the crowd is. And I don't think you can do a 100% we know exactly who it was. We can make some guesses of who it was and such things. But again, those are guesses, perhaps good, perhaps bad. But it's important to try to figure that out, to figure out exactly everything that's going on. I'm sorry, I'm going to plug in because my old battery is dying again. Sorry. Okay, Tim, you've been raising your hand. You've been
I've always felt that the crowd was better organized, that supported Barabbas, and he was more popular and certainly better known. And the word you used in the first one, the rabble, the Jewish rabble, they were excited and they wanted to see justice, but I think the organized support was for Barabbas.
So you're that's number, is that 2? 2 or 3, maybe a combo of 2 or 3 in that area. Yeah. That would be number 3, I guess. Yeah. You're going with Volz. I wonder, the one thing I wonder if it's the religious leaders getting their plants in. That's what I wonder. Because, I mean, the temple is a big operation. They have guards, they have hangers-on. You guys are coming. We're going to make sure that this Jesus is condemned to death. We know that he'll try to give somebody. We don't want Jesus get free. Let's get Barabbas because, I mean, we don't like the Romans anyway. That would be apparently, excuse me, people knew who Barabbas was. Maybe that points out again that the folks there wanted Barabbas. That Barabbas's people were there. People who were supportive of him knew that stuff was going on. I don't know.
And that was my point. I think they were both better organized in presenting their case.
Well, where are Jesus' folks? I mean, if you think about where are the disciples? Let's talk about the 12.
No.
Where are they? Well, Peter's out crying someplace, or at least last time we found out he was that. Judas is not mentioned at all now in this. Mark's gospel doesn't mention him, but we read elsewhere that he's dead. So where's everybody else? Well, the last time we saw, that we will see John is he will be at with Jesus' mother at there, but it doesn't say they're here. There's no mention that any of the disciples are here. I don't know. How about the crowd that came in with Jesus who were going, Hosanna, all of this great stuff? What happened to them? Do we assume that these people turned on Jesus immediately? That's why I think it possibly is a different group of people. Or maybe they were disappointed, like Judas was, thinking that Jesus was coming to throw out the Romans. It's not what we wanted. This is not what we expected. Some suggest Judas did what he did to make Jesus change and bring down all of this down upon them. So that's a possibility too. I mean, there are all sorts of things, but we're kind of making educated guesses on that. Mark, if you look at it, it's very short and simple in it. Did you watch the Mel Gibson movie, The Passion of the Christ? And how difficult all of that is, how bloody it is? It's very quick in this gospel. It talks about it, but it doesn't go into any detail at all. Mark is going almost running through this, it seems to me like. Jesus, before Pilate, he's found guilty. He's treated poorly by the people, by the guards and all. He's taken, he's crucified, and he dies. I mean, it's just doom, doom, doom. It's fast. We don't get hardly any words at all, right? The whole thing about 7 last words of the cross is interesting because there's 7 last sayings, first of all, right? Because they are more than words, and you have to go through all 4 of the Gospels to get them all together. Next week, we'll look at what exactly Jesus said in this Gospel, but it's interesting to think of that. Sorry, I keep going farther and farther. We're still kind of in the same place. Tim has another one.
Yeah, and there could have been an intimidation, and fear of the disciples, and they were obviously confused about what was happening.
I think you have to emphasize the fear. If they took Jesus, they might take us too. I mean, we'll get into that, especially as they're locked in the upper room after he's risen and all, for fear of the Jews. I mean, after he's dead, they're in the locked upper room because of fear of the Jewish folks. Yeah, all of that's true. Let's walk a little farther through. So I've given you all of the fun scenarios for you to play with, and you can probably write up your PhD or THD on that, and you could, if you can do well with that, that would be good. Number 6, verse 6. At the festival, Pilate used to release for the people a prisoner whom they requested. The word there for they, or for whom it is specifically, it says he released for the people, but the way that the Greek is, it kind of leaves it, it could be more pointed toward the chief priest in the way the language is done there, but that may be putting too much there. We already talked about Barabbas, right? Son of the Father, and the irony that the fake son of the Father will be saved and the real son of the Father will be crucified. That's kind of an interesting point. The crowd, our emphasis on this has been on the crowd, who exactly they are. They came up and began to ask Pilate to do as was his custom. I think I mentioned that the custom is not mentioned any place except in the New Testament. It doesn't mean that it's not true. It just means that it's not recorded in other documents. Don't know why. I happen to believe it's true because it says it happens here. Pilate answered them, "Do you want me to release the King of the Jews for you?" I italicized the King of the Jews because possibly it would have been in quotation marks almost, because again, he's reading from that document that this is what is said about who Jesus is. I went past that already, Jim. You don't need that. Okay. And again, the irony. There's a lot of irony here. Do you want to release the King of the Jews? He is the king of the Jews, right? He's king of everybody. And the answer is going to be no. It's kind of ironic. Verse 10, for he knew it was because of envy that the chief priests had handed him over. The leaders are worried about their status. I think that's what we were talking about a little bit before, the status of themselves and all, as opposed to what God was doing here. The Son of God is sent to his death because, well, you can almost go back to the whole thing about people are in curvitas, in se, curved in on themselves. That's what sin goes almost back to the garden in itself there. Pilate asked them again. So Pilate's trying to get out of it, it seems to me, like almost. Are you sure, basically? Then what would you want me to do with the one you call? Notice he says, you call the King of the Jews. This is a quote. I found this quote by a fellow by the name of Cranfield. That Pilate should have asked the crowd this question is surprising but not incredible. Did he hope that the crowd would beg for the release of Jesus of Nazareth as well? Did he intend in that case to make a show of generosity by releasing 2 prisoners instead of 1? Or did he hope to persuade them to alter their request? What do you think?
I think he wanted them to
Any
alter.
thoughts? Trying to get out of it?
I think he wanted them to alter their request. Like, I don't think he really wanted to crucify Jesus, but he also didn't want riots because that was going to cause trouble for him. So it was kind of like, come on.
Doesn't he show more hesitation in other gospels to crucify him?
I think so, yeah. It's interesting. Again, Mark's whoosh. We're going right through it real fast. It's interesting, you know. See here, so here he's this Roman gentleman. He has this job. It's a day job. But what you read about is you do the work in the morning, and then in the afternoon you have off to do things that gentlemen do. So on one hand, he didn't care about this guy. Just one person. And if it's going to cause riots, it's better that, well, that goes back to what we read before. It's better than one man to die than the whole nation, right? I mean, for all that. And yet he didn't want to lose. It's a pretty cushy job.
Right.
If you think about it. He's got a good job.
But there's also that nagging, thinking about what his wife told her.
And then interesting, it's not mentioned here at all. I think that's what
Yeah.
you're referring. It's not mentioned at all. Just zoom.
So he knows what's right.
That's Luke, isn't it? I think that's Luke. I think that's Luke who did that more information.
But yeah, he's hesitant, I'd say. I'd say he's hesitant. He doesn't.
But, verse 13, crucify him. Again they shouted, crucify him. It's a very common thing in this time. In Judea in the first century for bandits and insurrectionists, and they're trying to point out Jesus being kind of like this. That's what Barabbas was. He was an insurrectionist. He should have been crucified, right? Mark.
Just a little more irony concerning Barabbas. My notes say that his first name was also Jesus.
I'm sorry?
My notes in my Bible say that Barabbas' first name was also Jesus. And I'll just read it real quick. Apparently he is an insurrectionist who sought the military overthrow of Rome. In some manuscripts gives his first name as Jesus, a common name of the period. The choice Pilate proposes to the crowd is unwittingly ironic. Jesus Barabbas would be the political savior of Israel, or Jesus of Nazareth is true savior of the world. So more irony.
The irony runs throughout the whole thing, and especially, I think Mark is probably more ironic than other gospels in this. Maybe it points it out more. I don't know. Maybe that's wrong. So crucify, cross. Originally cross for crucifixion came from the Persians who had just a stick. It was kind of round on the top. They put somebody up there and tie him to. The Romans made it even better, quote unquote, by putting arms out and making it more painful and all. And it's not a good way to die. And it was quite often used. And Pilate in verse 14, why? What has he done wrong? What wrong has this fellow done? The answer is nothing. The irony is he who was sinless will die, and the one who is sinful, Barabbas, or Jesus Barabbas, will live, be freed. Wasn't there a movie made up about Barabbas then? Was there one about him? Maybe if not, we should write that story and make it up. About he was saved by Jesus dying and it changes his life somehow. I don't know.
I think it was part of another movie. I seem to remember some scenes of that.
That would be an interesting one.
Yeah.
Have you ever read The Fourth Wise Man? There's a movie version of it, The Fourth Wise Man. It's kind of funny that Martin Sheen plays the Fourth Wise Man, and his son Charlie, who more recently has got into all sorts of trouble, is one of the young soldiers there. Interesting. But the story, it's an old story. I forget the name of the author that wrote it, and it's the fourth wise man who missed the other three. He kept missing all the opportunities, and he ends up doing all of the stuff that he brought, the jewels he had to sell to help people and all. I mean, so it's made up on the same type of thing. We should write that. In retirement, I'll write that. I can't do that thing. Okay. So Pilate says, why? What has he done wrong? And they shouted all the more, crucify him. Well, the chief priests have really got this Jesus going. I'm sorry, they've got the crowd going to get Jesus gone. They want him gone, and it is doing well. Come on, I need battery power. Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them, and after having Jesus flogged, he handed him over to be crucified. What I've read is that flogging is a very common thing that was done. It could be done very difficult. Again, this is a restrained version, doesn't say much. Flagello in Latin is the verb that, well, it's actually a version of it in Greek from the Latin. And flogging could be so bad, and it's often done right outside the city, but this apparently is done inside. And then oftentimes the person being flogged would die before they could be crucified. And the flagellum instrument that's used, and probably is used here, this is a quote from Svite, composed of leather thongs loaded at intervals with bones and metal, and the sufferer sometimes lashed to a column. I think that was kind of what they did in the one that we talked about before. Yeah, they did that. But can you imagine, I mean, especially doing it on the back, tearing at the skin and exposing parts, can you imagine having to carry a cross, whether it's the whole cross or just the cross being there on that? Talk about the pain that would be there. And so that was a common portion that would be done. And having done that, then he is now handing him over. The next step is he will go to be crucified, but you have to be humiliated first. And that's what happens next. Take another pause there. Anything you want to talk about? We've got this far. Verse 16, the soldiers led him away to the palace, that is the governor's residence, and called the whole company together. Some interesting thoughts. Soldiers here would be, are going to be Roman soldiers, obviously. The whole company could be, it would be cohort is the technical word. Do I have that there? Yeah, it is there. Yeah, I don't have that one there. I've got the whole company. Halos, oh, there it is, yeah, on that bottom one. Spira, a cohort, at least 600 soldiers. So we could be talking, if it says the whole, before it said all of the Sanhedrin, we question whether it actually literally was all, but it could be most of them or perhaps all of them. And so they treat Jesus rather poorly. The palace, it's interesting to me that the word for palace is the same word that's used for courtyard. It is ale. It's fascinating to me, I don't know. But it says the governor's residence, and that is the praetorium. And so then comes the question of where is this? Is it the fortress of Antonia? You talked about that last time, I think it was, Jim. That's one of the possibilities. It could be that. It could be Herod had built a palace nearby that was, let's see, in the upper edge of the city and gave a rooftop view of the sacrificial altar of the temple. So it's up higher, it could look down, could be that place. The best answer is we don't know, and I suppose that means it's not that important. I always thought it would be the Fortress of Antonio that's right there. But wherever it was, there's enough room for our dear soldiers to do their part. And so they do. There were things you would expect if we're going to treat someone poorly. They dressed him in a purple robe. That's the color of royalty, right? They twisted together a crown of thorns, or they plaited together. They made this, and we think of it placing it upon the type, the way it's described is it would be like a wreath around. I have read that someone has tried to make it more like a helmet that would cover the whole head, but the word that's used is a crown, and the Stephanos makes it the type, kind of almost like the little wreath that they would give a victor type thing of a thing. So that's what they kind of do. And so they really make fun of, he is the king of the Jews, so quote unquote. So they salute him, give him that type of honor. They're hitting him on the head with a stick. They're spitting at him. These are all things that would be referred to in those servant songs about Jesus being the suffering servant. These are all things that would have happened to him. They get down on their knees. They're paying him homage. They're worshiping him, King of the Jews. And after they had mocked him, they stripped him of the purple robe and put his clothes back on them. And so they take him out. Well, we'll come there as they take him out to crucify him. The implication as you read, folks, on these is that the Romans didn't like the Jewish people. And this would be a time, especially soldiers, to really wail on him, if you will, to really treat him poorly, to show their contempt for the Jewish people and all that does. It's interesting that there's, the irony you can see there about they're worshiping him. They're making fun of him as king. He is the king. They're worshiping him. He does deserve worship. They're giving him homage, fake homage, and all of this. There's another thing that talks about fulfilling Jesus' own words. In chapter 10:34, it says they will scourge him. It talks about they will spit on him. And it talks about that they will mock him. This is what Jesus said would happen. So all of Jesus' words that he spoke come true. And so we've come then to the end of our little discussion on Pilate and the following part. Again, the thing that surprises me the most is it's quick, not filled with details, but we've kind of talked about that before in Mark, haven't we? It just kind of goes quick through and go through. Jesus is silent pretty much, doesn't have a lot to say. You say so, or you say so, question type thing, but not much is said. And again, I think whomever the crowd is, who is the crowd? What was their motivation? We obviously know the motivation of the chief priests who seem to be leading the charge for the Sanhedrin. They're trying to get Jesus killed, and they will succeed. That's all I got. Questions, comments, things you want to talk about? Mr. Tim.
You'd indicated that flogging frequently resulted in death before they got to crucifixion. Do you think that Pilate hoped that would end it right there if he died in the courtyard and not have to go through the...
You want my opinion? I think Pilate didn't care.
Oh.
I think it's just...
Get rid of it.
I don't know, but then there's that other part, but it's not in Mark's gospel about his wife don't have anything to do with. There's that little part there. But, out of sight, out of mind, I'll go back to mine. We don't have the washing his hands of the whole thing. We don't have his blood being on us and our children. We miss all of that type of stuff. So Pilate just seems here to be, well, can't release him. Okay, go ahead. I don't care.
So that the mocking is more of the crowd, the soldiers.
Oh, close, yeah.
And,
So who the crowd is important to figure out. I've heard sermons. I don't think I preached one. If you go back and look, you might find one. preach one saying that the same people who said Hosanna on Sunday said crucify him on, I don't think it's the same people. Maybe some people, well, Judas possibly could have said that, I don't know. But I don't think it was the same people. I think it was a different group of folks. I always thought it were plants by the Sanhedrin, the religious leaders, chief priests, bringing their own folks. But the more I wonder, especially in Mark pulling up Barabbas so quickly, inserting him into this, I wonder if perhaps Barabbas's folks got in there too. I don't know. Tim, got another one?
Well, I go back to that word rabble, which I thought was interesting. That suggests more of a loosely knit group of people and just angry, and that then having the opportunity to scourge him and that it appears to me that I never thought that they could be the same people that worshipped him coming into town the Sunday before.
Well, it's interesting if you think about the group of people who came in with Jesus. There were a lot of people coming in then. His disciples are the ones that are emphasizing, hail, all of this. I wonder if others just, hey, this is exciting. How many of them actually were into saying this is who Jesus is? I think you could make an argument that there were a lot of pilgrims coming in. They just happened to be in the crowd too. And hey, let's go around. This sounds exciting. It's part of the rabble, I guess, if you want to say again. Hey, this sounds exciting. Let's do that. I don't know how many actually did or did not. Remember, it's in Acts. I forget it's in chapter 1 that there were 120 believers before Pentecost. 120, I believe. 120 were together. So that tells me that a lot of folks had believed. Well, if you read in chapter 6 of John, you'll see that a lot of people stopped following Jesus after that long discussion. And so I think the numbers of Jesus go up and down. And again, the emphasis is Jesus is all alone here, right? Peter's even gone. If you go with Michael Card's, Peter's Jesus' best friend, even his best friend has gone. And when Jesus is at the cross, who's there? Well, ladies, you come off really well. Gentlemen came off pretty bad. John's listed as there. Nobody else is. Now, I don't know if they're watching from afar with their binoculars that haven't been invented yet. They're watching at home on the live stream is what they were doing. Can you imagine they would be doing live streams today? They would be doing that. And that's what would happen. I mean, think what happened in Rome with in the Colosseum, all the terrible things that were done there for people. All these people coming together to watch people die. Yay, that sounds fun. Although in our own country, you can see history of people going for lynchings, people wanting to watch different ways in which people were executed. So there's something about that draws people too. Maybe that's what drew some of the folks, this rabble, to their, something's going on, let's see what's happening. Who's going to die today? We don't know how often people were dying there, how often, but we know a lot of folks were. Tim?
One last question. That the law was that when you were accused, you must answer. And so Pilate saying, why would you not answer me?
Well, the law we're in reference to was according to I'm not sure if that's Roman law, it was Jewish law, I think. It was in reference to that he was required to respond to the Jewish folks. I don't know if he's required to. Jesus apparently did not follow that if it was. So the next question you're going to ask me is then, did he sin? I don't think so. I think Jesus is doing the whole thing of following the form of the suffering servant from Isaiah 52:53, like a lamb that is silent before slaughter. And I think that's what he's doing. There's no one there. I mean, I'm not. Carol?
You just suggested another possibility for an element of the crowd, and that is excitement seekers that they didn't care about Barabbas or Jesus, perhaps.
Yeah, they're the rabble, if you will. They're there for the excitement.
Yeah.
See what's going on. But then, I don't know, chief priests want this, so sure, we'll go with them. I don't care. Well, we're out of time. Yep, it's 48. I gotta get going to my next slide. And we'll close with a short prayer. Gracious Lord, open our hearts and lives to you. Help us as we ponder what's happening with Jesus, as we look back to the trial, found him who was innocent, the one who will be killed, the true Son of the Father, and the fake Son of the Father let go. Help us, Lord, that we might be faithful. And even when we are confronted in such ways as some of the disciples of old were, that we might remain faithful. And help us then as we will move next week to look at Jesus' death on the cross and ponder our own part in causing that. And know that it wasn't, we can't blame Jewish people, can't even blame Pilate, but it's our fault that Jesus had to die because of our sins. Help us to repent then and to be restored into a relationship with you. We ask this in Jesus' most precious name. Amen. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention and time.